Howdy, howdy. Howdy, howdy. Welcome back to the White Lotus, episode 5. We are almost at the end. This is this penultimate episode. And things are getting there. Things are certainly getting there. We had a lot of questions answered this episode based on, what we knew was going to happen, what was already happening. The tensions are increasing, and I am having the time of my life. This episode starts kind of where last episode left off, the aftermath of the night before, with, Armand and Dylan kind of scrambling to get it together. Tanya and her beau saying good night. Through that, we are kind of introduced to the major storylines of the episode, of what the episode is going to be. Basically 3 plots. One, like the big A plot, is kind of a combo plot between Paula and Kai and the rest of the big family. Mark, Nicole, Olivia, Quinn, that squad. Next storyline would be Tanya and her beau. And the third storyline is kind of Rachel, Shane, and, the mommy. So I would like to start talking about one of the most interesting and compelling storylines from the whole series. I would say the best storyline in the whole series so far was Paula wanting to help Kai by helping him steal the bracelets that Mark gave Nicole out of the safe, knowing that those are $75,000 bracelets. That money could go towards helping Kai, regain the life that he once had. It starts off with, this really this happy moment that kind of, you're thinking, oh, this is so wholesome, Paula and Kai, and then it kind of turns really sad when they're realizing, this is it. Paula's gonna go back to her mainland life, and Kai is going to go back to, underprivileged situation that the hotel has caused. And it's just very heavy. For one of the first times in the series, you kind of start feeling the weight that's been building this whole episode. It's like stuff has been being lifted, and now it's kind of starting to come down, and you're starting to feel it. Touching on, since we're talking about the family, Quinn is having the time of his life. Seems like everyone else was, having kind of a good time, and now it's going downhill. And Quinn was having a bad time, now it's going uphill with his, boater bros. And one thing I really noticed was the fact that the family just seems to have no filter whatsoever around Paula. They argue, fight, talk about wild things. I have brought friends on vacations before, and my family, it feels like it's custom to just kind of mute the general family drama, put on the filter, be like, okay, we're gonna be like kind of professional with this kid that my kid has brought. But no, that is not the case for this family. Obviously, well, I'll save like the keystone whole part of the episode for the end, kind of. We'll talk about everything else that's going on. And we'll talk about how all the storylines wrap up. But one thing I do also want to talk about is, this tension between Olivia and Paula that seems unbearable for them. It seems like this must suck to be brought on this vacation, and then you guys are basically, you're not saying it, but you're basically at each other's throats at the moment. I'll, to hop off that point to go to kind of what's going on with Tanya and her beau, and just kind of thinking, about Tanya as a character. I started to feel really sympathetic for Tanya. I started to feel like, okay, Tanya might be like the only pure character that's here. She had a really tough childhood with her mother. She is here to scatter her mother's ashes. It's a really complicated thing where like it's her mother, but she didn't like her at all, but she still like wants to do right by her because it's her mother. And she's talking about, having all these layers, and then you're like, oh man, like Tanya really is just having a tough time. But then you kind of start to take a step back, and you just kind of get a sense of like the vapidness and the flightiness of those in positions of privilege. And the fact that it's almost the same as, these college girls reading these books, specifically Olivia, seeming like, I'm going to read these books. Paula, to some extent, too. Like, I'm going to read these books. I'm going to be all in for social advocacy, but I'm not going to be kind to the people around me. Or, Tanya being like, I'll sponsor you, Belinda. I'll do a good thing for you. I like you. I have this position of privilege, and I will help you. And then as soon as some other shiny thing catches her eye, she kind of forgets about it. Kind of speaks to, the aspect of today's society where people will be into causes because it's the fashionable thing to do, and then they'll kind of back away and forget about them when something else happens, or when something important happens in their lives, or they forget, basically. Shane, this episode was so fun. You still hate him, but this was his best episode, I think. Just having this foothold over Armand, kind of dangling stuff in front of Armand's face and being like, well, you kind of gotta do what I tell you. I think the actor is just playing it so well, playing this character unbelievably well. It's really impressive. And Shane's the kind of guy who you love to hate, I feel like. I love to hate Shane. His dynamic with his mom is hilarious. You kind of get a sense of, where Shane came from by including the mom. It's strange how I'm enjoying this dynamic that Shane and Armand have. I think it speaks to the writing a little bit. The observation I had was, when the mom came, she was like, you'll barely know I'm here. I'm not going to hang out with you guys very much. And she's at every single meal, and she goes to the pool with them. And it's just really funny how the mom has hijacked this honeymoon for a full 2 days, basically. A full 2 days out of the 6 days that they're going to be there. Wild. Well, I guess they were going to go to Tahiti. I feel like that's not going to happen anymore. Obviously, it seems like Rachel is kind of coming to terms with the fact that she doesn't want this. She is seeing Shane and her mom, in his mom. She's seeing Shane and his mom, I think. And she's not liking what she's seeing. She's not liking, where her spot, what it's looking like her spot is going to be in the relationship, in the marriage. She doesn't want to be a trophy wife. It was obscene when the mom was like, there's nothing wrong with being a trophy wife. Like, being a trophy wife. Like, wild stuff. And, it seems Rachel says, I've made a big mistake. And I'm very excited to see what happens. You obviously assume Rachel is leaving Shane. The only other thing that I could see happening is Rachel being like, we'll give it another chance. If I'm talking about the pessimistic ending of this show, there are a few pessimistic endings that I have. And that the positive ending is Rachel leaving Shane. The negative ending is like, we'll give it another chance. And that would semi-explain Shane at the beginning of the whole series at the airport being like in a bad mood because he's like, why did my wife have such a bad time? Tanya and Belinda now, it's wrapped up with Tanya obviously leaving dinner with Belinda to go talk to her beau. It's seeming like this thing is not going to happen. Tanya is very disinterested now, whereas before she was locked in on this wellness center that Belinda wants to open. And Belinda, it's very clear that, I don't blame Belinda for, having those dollar signs in her eyes, having this dream that she's had, literally hanging in front of her, and she has to, sit through Tanya, like, talking about herself, and sit through Tanya's crisis that she's having, and try to, stay sympathetic, while this elephant in the room is standing right behind Tanya, trying to ignore it. But obviously Belinda brings up the wellness spa at a bad time, and Tanya doesn't take it very well. Her mind's in a different place, and it's knowing Tanya's character, it's hard to believe that Belinda's going to drag it back. So the positive ending, obviously, for that storyline is Tanya funds the wellness center. The negative ending is that Tanya leaves Hawaii and forgets about Belinda. She leaves with her beau and forgets about Belinda. Finally, my favorite storyline of the whole series. So, number one, Paula really should have left the boat when Mark and Nicole were leaving. We can talk about that a little bit. Mark and Nicole they're having this crisis in their marriage. I think there's fault on both sides. I think it's very well written. in terms of, maybe Nicole doesn't respect Mark, and maybe she should show him more love, but also like how, like she's been so hurt by their past. It's just, it's a complicated situation, very complicated situation. And, they leave the boat because they're fighting, and Paula sees them leaving the boat, knows that there's a chance that Kai is going to the apartment currently. I'm pretty sure his name is Kai. I hope it is. That Kai is going to the boat right now. She knows Kai is going to the room right now. And she sees Mark and Nicole. She literally sees Nicole say, "I'm going back to the room." And Nicole leaves, and Paula's just like, I hope nothing bad happens. Should have gone back. That whole scene was, that was tense. That was action from the White Lotus. So the guy who commented last week, I hope something happens. There you go. Something happened. Really, really good scene with Kai. Just tension. Mark getting beat up. But, obviously Kai wasn't going to hurt Nicole. But in Nicole's eyes, like, Mark saved her. In Mark's eyes, Mark saved Nicole. And it's funny, number one, good symbolism with these bracelets, right? Mark bought Nicole these bracelets, and Nicole had been wearing them, and they were a clear reminder of, their past, and like cuffs to their past, basically. And their marriage, wasn't really going very well. I mean, they were holding it together. They were kind of floating by, but it was clear that there was no passion. They talked about the flame before, in the first episode when they showed Steve Zahn's balls. She was like, I haven't, they implied that they hadn't had sex in a very long time, and as soon as these cuffs are gone, it seems like they're in love with each other again. It seems like it reignited something for them. So it's a very clear metaphor of breaking the cuffs, if you will. Breaking the cuffs that held them chained to their past. And then this really strange dynamic, it's wild, of Paula and Kai, and that ended badly, right? Like, that was bad, what happened with them. And Kai, we have no idea what's going to happen. Pessimistic ending, Kai gets arrested. Positive ending, Kai gets away, throws the bracelets in the ocean or whatever. I'm assuming that's what he did. Don't know. Just to get rid of the evidence. Weird that Kai wore the hotel garb while going into the room. That way they can clearly tell that he's a hotel worker, and the hotel can just go through their list of employees and be like, well, who could it have been? Literally bring the employees into the room with the family, and they can be like, well, that was his build. That's what he looked like. That's what he sounded like. So shouldn't have worn hotel garb. Maybe should have hid and tried to get out. Like, a ton of things that he could have done better. But, you can't blame someone for freaking out in that moment when they're not a professional thief. So, but this weird dynamic of, this is what brings the family together. You're happy to see this family who's been bickering for so long. You're kind of happy to see them, like, not be bickering. But at the same time, that, they're kind of set up as the villains in this Paula and Kai story. So it's strange. It's a really weird dynamic where you're happy and sad at the same time, and you wish that, it had been clean. This family didn't need those bracelets. Kai would have had money, and net zero for everyone, right? Or net positive. This is the family, 0. This is Kai going up. Or, I don't know. Just a really good episode. Really, a lot of themes, a lot of metaphors, a lot of heaviness. It really felt like the first episode where the weight, like I was saying earlier, you felt the weight, there was the darkness came in, right? It's a dark comedy. The darkness really came in this episode, and it made it the best episode of the series so far. We're really nearing a 5 rating. I'm going to give this one like a 4.8. I don't want to give it the perfect 5 yet, but it was better than a 4.5, 4.8. And it does beg the question, who's going to die? Who's going to die? My 2 leading candidates are Tanya and her beau. I could see the beau dying and Tanya being like, oh my god, I'm so sad, and just forgetting about Belinda and leaving because, he was coughing. And then Tanya, obviously, she has no ties to anyone else. Like, it's not going to be Rachel. We know Shane doesn't die. The mom is kind of gone, right? I don't think the mom dies, or else Shane would have been sadder at the airport. Shane literally, really looked at the casket. I mean, I could see it being Rachel, but it's just it'd be weird. Oh, she's a weird character to have die, I think. That would be more sad. Any of the family would be sad. Kai would be really, really sad. And I don't know if Shane would have, been looking at the casket like that. So I think it's Tanya, Rachel, Tanya's beau, Armand, the fourth. It could be Armand. It really could be. So, I don't know. White Lotus, so great. Such a great show. Will go down as one of the better HBO miniseries ever. Probably my favorite HBO miniseries ever, I would say. Up there with Chernobyl, Big Little Lies. But yeah, really great. Good job, White Lotus. See you next week for the finale.